Dawn breaks over a narrow mountain pass in Greece. The air smells of salt, iron, and dust. To the east, the earth trembles, not from an earthquake, but from footsteps. Tens of thousands of them, Persian infantry, archers, Immortals, the largest invasion force the ancient world has ever seen. And standing in their way, 300 men, no cavalry, no reinforcements, no retreat. The Persian king Xerxes looks toward the pass and laughs. He believes history will record this moment as a massacre. What he does not understand is geography, is discipline, is what happens when elite soldiers choose death on their own terms. Because Thermopylae is not an open battlefield, it is a knife edge, a stone corridor where numbers mean nothing. And before this day ends, the greatest empire on earth will learn a lesson written in blood. An army does not need to be large when it knows exactly where to stand. Before the first spear was raised at Thermopylae, the war had already been decided, at least on paper. To the east stretched the Persian Empire, the largest political and military machine the world had ever seen. It ruled from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Aegean, dozens of nations, hundreds of cities, millions of subjects. Persia did not conquer by chaos. It conquered by scale, logistics, and relentless pressure. Greece, by contrast, was not a nation. It was a patchwork of rival city-states, independent, suspicious, often hostile to one another. Athens argued, Sparta isolated itself, others waited, watching which way the wind would blow. When the Persians came before, many Greek cities surrendered without a fight. Earth and water were given as symbols of submission, survival over pride. Now Persia was coming again. King Xerxes did not see this campaign as a war. He saw it as administration, a final correction at the western edge of his empire. His army was not built for elegance. It was built for inevitability. Infantry from every corner of the empire, archers trained to darken the sky, engineers, supply trains, and naval escorts moving in parallel. This was not an army meant to win a single battle. It was an army meant to erase resistance entirely. Against this force stood a Greece divided, outnumbered, and painfully aware of what defeat would mean. Cities burned, populations enslaved, autonomy erased. Many Greek leaders believed resistance was suicide. They were not cowards, they were realists. And yet, in that realism, they missed something essential. Persia's strength was also its weakness. Its power depended on open ground, movement, space to deploy numbers. Take that away, and the empire would be forced to fight on terms it had never needed to master. Somewhere between the mountains and the sea, that realization would harden into a plan. Thermopylae was not chosen for glory. It was chosen because it was unforgiving. The name itself meant the hot gates, a narrow strip of land squeezed between sheer mountains and the sea. At its widest point, the pass allowed only a few dozen men to stand shoulder to shoulder. At its narrowest, fewer than 10. No flanking, no cavalry charges, no room for mass formations. For an army built on numbers, Thermopylae was a trap disguised as terrain. This was the critical mistake Xerxes did not fully respect. Persian warfare depended on breadth. Archers softened the enemy. Infantry advanced in depth. Cavalry exploited gaps. All of that required space. Thermopylae offered none. Every Persian soldier who entered the pass was forced to fight face to face, shield against shield, spear against spear, and in that kind of fighting, quality mattered more than quantity. The Greeks understood this. They did not intend to defeat Persia at Thermopylae. They intended to delay it. Every hour the pass held was an hour for Greek city-states to mobilize. Every day bought time for the navy to contest Persian control at sea. This was not a standalone defense. Thermopylae was the land anchor of a larger strategy. While hoplites blocked the road, Greek ships contested the straits at Artemisium. If one failed, the other collapsed. But if both held, Persia's advance slowed to a crawl. The terrain amplified discipline. Shields locked, spears thrust from behind the front line. Wounded men rotated out while fresh soldiers stepped forward. In open ground, Persian numbers would overwhelm. This was not heroism, it was geometry. The Greeks were not betting on courage. They were betting on the fact that stone, salt water, and gravity did not care how large an empire was. Thermopylae reduced the greatest army on earth to a single narrow question. Can you break men who cannot be surrounded? Persia was about to find out. In Thermopylae, numbers became a liability. Soldiers at the back could not fight. They could only push forward into congestion, confusion, and death. And Sparta did not send 300 men because it lacked soldiers. It sent 300 because that was how many were required for the task at hand. These were not ordinary warriors, nor were they a symbolic gesture. Each man had survived a system designed to break the weak long before the enemy ever arrived. From childhood, Spartan males were absorbed into the agoge, a state-run program that valued endurance, obedience, and cohesion above individual survival. Hunger was constant, punishment was routine, fear was stripped away early. By adulthood, a Spartan did not fight for personal glory, he fought as a component of a larger mechanism. This mattered at Thermopylae. In close terrain, battles are not decided by courage alone, but by formation discipline. The Spartan hoplite fought behind a heavy bronze shield, overlapping with the shield of the man beside him. Each soldier protected not himself, but the exposed side of his neighbor. If one man broke, the entire line collapsed. Spartans were trained never to let that happen. Their spear was not a dueling weapon, it was a system tool. The front rank absorbed impact, the second and third ranks stabbed over their shoulders. When a man was wounded or exhausted, he rotated out, replaced instantly by another. The line remained intact. Persian soldiers, trained for looser formations and range dominance, were forced into a killing environment they were never meant to survive. The number 300 is often misunderstood. Leonidas did not arrive alone. Other Greek contingents fought beside the Spartans in the early stages. What made the Spartans distinct was not their presence, but their role. They were the stabilizing core. When pressure mounted, it was the Spartan line that held. When momentum threatened to break, it was Spartan discipline that restored it. These men were also chosen carefully. Each had living sons. Sparta expected them to die. The state ensured their bloodlines would continue. This was not recklessness, it was institutional calculation. Unlike Persian soldiers, who fought for empire, tribute, or fear of punishment, Spartans fought for an identity built entirely around duty. Retreat was not tactical failure, it was dishonor, and dishonor in Sparta was worse than death. At Thermopylae, this mindset transformed the pass into a machine of attrition. Persian assaults shattered not because the attackers lacked bravery, but because they faced men trained to absorb violence without yielding ground. Every push met resistance, every breakthrough attempt died in the press of shields and spear points. This was not mythic heroism, it was military specialization. Sparta produced soldiers the way other states produced artisans. Thermopylae was simply the environment where that specialization reached its most lethal expression. And soon, Persia would commit its finest troops to test whether discipline alone could stop an empire. When the Persian assault began, it did not resemble desperation. It was methodical, confident, almost routine. Xerxes expected the Greeks to break quickly. The pass was narrow, yes, but he believed pressure alone would be enough. If numbers could not surround the enemy, they would simply crush them forward. The first Persian infantry advanced in disciplined columns, shields raised, spears forward. They entered the pass expecting resistance, but not endurance. What they encountered instead was a wall that did not move. The Spartan-led line absorbed the initial impact without retreating a single step. Persian soldiers pressed forward, only to find their formation collapsing under its own weight. Those in the front rank could not retreat. Those behind continued to push. The result was congestion, confusion, and exposure. Greek spears worked with brutal efficiency. Each thrust was short, controlled, and aimed into tightly packed bodies. Persian shields were lighter, designed for mobility and missile warfare. In the confined space of Thermopylae, they offered little protection. Men fell forward into the line behind them, creating obstacles rather than openings. Xerxes ordered wave after wave into the pass. Each was repelled in the same way. The Greeks did not pursue, they did not overextend. They held their ground and allowed the terrain to do the work. When fatigue set in, hoplites rotated out smoothly, maintaining constant pressure without breaking formation. Persian archers attempted to change the equation. Arrows darkened the air, but the pass worked against them as well. The angle was wrong, the distance was short. Greek shields and helmets absorbed the volleys. Few arrows found their mark, and those that did rarely penetrated bronze. As casualties mounted, something unexpected began to happen. Persian morale wavered. These soldiers were trained to win through momentum. At Thermopylae, momentum did not exist. Every advance ended the same way, with bodies piled in a narrowing corridor and no progress to show for it. Xerxes watched from his vantage point, increasingly frustrated. According to later accounts, he rose from his throne more than once, stunned by what he was seeing. This was not how imperial wars were supposed to unfold. The enemy was outnumbered, the enemy was exposed, and yet the enemy refused to collapse. What Persia encountered was not defiance fueled by emotion, but resistance built on repetition. The Greeks did the same thing again and again, and it worked every time. No dramatic charges, no reckless heroics, just controlled violence applied consistently. By the end of the first day, the ground within the pass was slick with blood and broken equipment. Persian dead outnumbered Greek losses by a staggering margin, and still the line held. This was the moment the campaign shifted. Thermopylae was no longer a delay, it was an embarrassment, and to restore authority, Xerxes would now commit troops he had hoped to keep in reserve. The Immortals were ordered forward. The Immortals were not sent as reinforcements, they were sent as a statement. This was the unit Xerxes trusted to end resistance when ordinary force failed, 10,000 strong, permanently maintained, instantly replenished. When one man fell, another took his place. To the empire, they symbolized permanence and inevitability. Their armor was finer, their training more rigorous, their reputation absolute. Across Asia, the Immortals had broken enemies who believed themselves strong. Xerxes expected no different at Thermopylae, but reputation does not alter physics. When the Immortals entered the pass, they faced the same constraints as every unit before them. Narrow ground, limited visibility, no room to maneuver. Their lighter armor and shorter spears, ideal for mobility and flexibility, became liabilities in close, sustained combat. The Spartans did not change tactics. They did not need to. The shield wall held. The front rank absorbed pressure. The rear rank struck forward relentlessly. Discipline replaced speed. Endurance replaced aggression. The Immortals attempted to force breakthroughs through precision and rotation, but each effort dissolved into congestion. Their formation could not deploy fully. Soldiers at the rear could not contribute. Those at the front faced concentrated resistance with no relief. Unlike earlier Persian troops, the Immortals did not panic. They fought hard. They adapted where possible. But adaptation requires space, and Thermopylae offered none. Every tactical adjustment collapsed back into the same reality, face-to-face combat against men trained specifically for this environment. Losses mounted. Elite soldiers fell in numbers that could not be concealed. The symbolic unit meant to demonstrate imperial dominance now bled in full view of the army. The psychological impact was severe. If the Immortals could not break the Greeks here, then no unit could. Xerxes waited for the moment the line would finally crack. It never came. Instead, the pass became a grinder. Each Immortal who fell narrowed the corridor further, creating obstacles that hindered the next assault. Bodies, shields, and broken spears piled against the Greek line, slowing momentum rather than building it. By the end of the second day, the reality was unavoidable. Thermopylae could not be taken by force alone. Persia's greatest strength, its depth, had become irrelevant. The empire had encountered a defense that could not be overwhelmed from the front. This was not a failure of courage or numbers, it was a failure of approach. Xerxes still possessed overwhelming power, but power unused is meaningless. To end the standoff, he would need something the Greeks could not counter with shields or discipline. He would need a way around the pass, and in the mountains above Thermopylae, such a path existed. Thermopylae did not fall because the Spartans were defeated. It fell because the terrain they relied upon was no longer exclusive. Above the pass, winding through the mountains, existed a narrow goat path known only to locals. It was steep, hidden, and useless to large formations, but it offered something Xerxes needed desperately, an angle. A local Greek named Ephialtes revealed its existence to the Persians. His motivations were not heroic or complex. Ancient sources suggest reward, favor, or survival. Whatever the reason, his decision transformed the battle from stalemate to inevitability. Under cover of darkness, Persian troops began the ascent. It was slow, dangerous, and exhausting. This was not a grand maneuver, it was a calculated risk. If discovered early, the force could be destroyed in the mountains, but Persia had learned by now that frontal assault was futile. Greek sentries guarding the path were light infantry, not Spartans. When the Persians emerged from the forest at dawn, surprise did the work that numbers could not. The defenders were overwhelmed quickly. Messengers were dispatched immediately toward the pass below. By the time word reached Leonidas, the situation was clear. The Persians were no longer contained. Within hours, Greek forces would be surrounded from both sides. The terrain that had protected them now offered no escape. At this moment, the battle could have ended quietly. Leonidas could have withdrawn. The bulk of the Greek army could still retreat south and regroup. Militarily, that option existed, but Thermopylae was never only a military action. Leonidas understood the purpose of the stand: delay, demonstration, commitment. If the line broke without resistance, the psychological effect would ripple across Greece. If it held even briefly, it would buy time and send a message far larger than survival. Leonidas ordered most allied contingents to withdraw. They obeyed, some reluctantly. A few chose to remain. The Spartans stayed. So did the Thespians, and a small number of others. They understood what the decision meant. This was no longer about stopping Persia. That outcome was now impossible. This was about forcing Xerxes to pay for every step forward. The men who remained prepared for a final engagement, knowing there would be no relief and no retreat. Weapons were checked, shields locked, the formation tightened. The objective had changed from defense to attrition. Above them, Persian troops descended the mountain path. Ahead of them, the main army prepared for a renewed frontal assault. The Greeks were about to be crushed between two forces. but before that happened, they would make one last stand, not for victory, but for time. The final phase of Thermopylae was not chaotic, it was deliberate. Leonidas knew the Persians would attack from both directions, and he understood that the pass itself was no longer defensible in the same way. So the Greeks advanced forward, away from the narrowest ground, choosing where they would die rather than waiting to be enveloped. This was not a charge, it was a controlled extension of the line, designed to maximize contact before encirclement closed completely. The Spartans fought without expectation of survival, but not without structure. Formation discipline remained intact even as the tactical situation collapsed. Persian forces surged forward with renewed confidence. The pressure was heavier now, relentless, coming from multiple angles. Spears broke, shields splintered. When weapons failed, Spartans fought with swords. When swords failed, they fought with hands and teeth. Ancient accounts describe a brutal compression of bodies, where neither side could maneuver and killing became intimate and exhausting. Leonidas fell early in this phase. The exact circumstances are unclear, but his death was immediately recognized. The Spartans surged around his body, not to recover it for ceremony, but to deny it to the enemy. Control of the king's corpse became a focal point of combat, symbolizing whether the stand would end in order or collapse. It did not collapse. The Greeks formed a final defensive knot around a small rise within the pass. There, surrounded, wounded, and outnumbered beyond counting, they continued to fight until resistance was physically impossible. Persian troops advanced cautiously now, no longer eager to close distance. The cost had been too high. Archers were ordered forward. From a distance, arrows rained down into the encircled defenders. Shields absorbed what they could. Bodies fell. The formation shrank. When the last of the Greeks died, the pass fell silent. There was no triumph in the Persian ranks, no cheers, only exhaustion and disbelief at the price paid for ground that now lay open. Militarily, Persia had won. The road into Greece was clear. Strategically, something far more dangerous had occurred. An army that was supposed to overwhelm had been delayed, bloodied, and exposed. News of the stand spread faster than the Persian advance. Across Greece, cities that had hesitated, now prepared, fleets mobilized, resistance hardened. Thermopylae did not stop the invasion. It ensured it would be fought to the end. Thermopylae ended in defeat, but it did not end in failure. The Greeks who died there achieved exactly what the strategy required. They delayed the Persian advance long enough for the rest of Greece to prepare. Cities that had wavered, now committed. Fleets gathered, command structures hardened. The invasion lost its sense of inevitability. More importantly, Thermopylae shattered a myth. Until that moment, the Persian army had appeared unstoppable. It conquered by scale, momentum, and psychological dominance. Thermopylae proved that it could be resisted. Not everywhere, not forever, but in the right place, with the right preparation, it could be made to bleed. That lesson mattered. Within months, Greek forces would exploit the time bought by the stand. At sea, Persian naval superiority would be broken. On land, the empire would be forced into battles it could not easily control. Thermopylae was not the turning point of the war, but it made every victory that followed possible. For Sparta, the stand became something more enduring than tactical success. It embodied a doctrine already central to its identity, that discipline and cohesion could hold even when survival was impossible. The names of the fallen were not preserved because they won, but because they did not yield. For Greece, Thermopylae became a reference point, a reminder that autonomy was worth defending, even against overwhelming force. Not because victory was guaranteed, but because submission carried its own cost. History often remembers numbers, empires, outcomes. Thermopylae is remembered for restraint, for men who stood where they were told to stand, for a pass that reduced an empire to a single narrow front, and for a battle that proved power is not measured only by what survives, but by what it forces an enemy to sacrifice. That is why Thermopylae still matters.